This week on To the Contrary.
First, the Fiancé visa and the San Bernardino terror attack. Then, thumbs up for the stay-at-home dad? Behind the headlines, Jane Goodall on how her work with chimps made her a women's rights advocate.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the Fiancé visa. We continue to learn more about the couple responsible for the terror attack that killed 14 Americans in San Bernardino. According to the FBI, Saeed Farouk and Tafshin Malik had online discussions about jihad and martyrdom. Those conversations took place before they were married and prior to Malik coming to the United States. Malik was a Pakistani native who received a so-called fiancé visa, bringing immigration vetting practices under great scrutiny. The Fiancé visa program requires at least one in-person interview, fingerprints, checks against U.S. terrorist watch lists, and reviews of family members, as well as travel history and places where a person has lived and worked. 519 Pakistanis came to the country last year to marry a U.S. citizen. So, Congresswoman, do we still consider female terrorists outliers and therefore we don't scrutinize them hard enough?
Bonnie, until now, female terrorists have been outliers. But with the emergence of the equal opportunity terrorists in San Bernardino, there goes another stereotype.
We've always highlighted that women aren't only victims in conflict, that they're often perpetrators as well, and we've seen that trend all over the world.
I think traditionally law enforcement has given women less scrutiny, and it's time to change that.
I think we've looked at an environment where assimilation is no longer gender neutral, and we have to pay close attention to how ISIS and other terrorist groups are using women to their advantage.
Well, the fiancé visa, obviously she was one in her year of 519 Pakistanis to come in, but does that make it worth changing the fiancé visa?
It's very interesting to see my good Republican colleagues all say, well, we don't really need to look more closely at the fiancé visa. We want to make sure that we promote marriage in effect. But the terrorist list, the no-fly list, which is part of it, shows that up to 90% of the people on the terrorist list have among them people, about 2,000, who have in fact been able to buy guns and explosives, and my Republican colleagues have voted down denying a gun or an explosive to somebody on the terrorist list. We ought to look more closely at the fiancé visa, even though they already are scrutinized very, very closely, and only 0.3%.
But how did they miss Malik then, if they are scrutinized very closely? Because she had internet activity before she came here, showing that she was pledging honor to the jihad.
Yeah, they should not have missed her at all. And we do have very strict requirements. My son works at the International Institute in St. Louis and works with Syrian refugees now, and they go through 2.5 years of scrutiny before they're allowed in this country. So what happened with her? Something really slipped up.
What are your thoughts on the fiancé visa?
I think at this point Americans want to feel safe, and I think looking at what's happening in Congress with respect to refugees and with the visas as well as the fiancé visas, what you're finding is that we're going through a process of trying to figure out how to do that, and it may be difficult. We're never going to guarantee that every single person who comes in this country is in some way potentially susceptible to being affiliated with an organization like ISIS, so we have to do what we can to sort of evaluate that. And the notion of marriage, I think that's a small minority of Republicans who are talking about the sanctity of marriage in the context of fiancé visas and what that means.
All right. Your thoughts about it?
I think we have to be really careful, because a lot of the issues that we're talking about as ways to bringing safety to America is actually may create second or third class citizenship. And I think that it's really important that we don't put security as a guide of our moral compass and our values in America, because it will always lead us astray.
So what's the reaction then? I mean, this is getting away from the fiancé visa, but it's still an immigration issue. What kind of reaction are Trump's claims, and stopping Islamic immigration for a period of time? What impact and what kind of reaction are they getting from the American Muslims?
Overwhelming fear. I mean, there's a lot of fear where we're really beginning to question what's our future in this country, and it's frightening for people who have no other place to go to. My friends are often joking, like, where would we go if Trump were to win? And, that's no longer a joke, and we're seriously considering, and the reality is there's nowhere for us to go. We're here, we're part of the social fabric, and just like any other immigrants, we're going to fight for our place within the public square.
You wrote a column this week about questioning your faith after San Bernardino, after these series of attacks. Tell us about that.
I think that anyone who's a person of faith is constantly having to have these, faith-shaking experiences, and the amount of violence that's taking place in the name of Islam has forced me and many others to go back and really ask ourselves the hard questions. I see this as an opportunity in the middle of crisis where people can really say, what is it that we need to shift and change, both within Islam, but again, I think even just looking at the way we're responding to refugees, it's a moment of truth for America as well to really think about our values and how we want to practice them, not just preach them.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It must be very scary, and that makes me sad to hear that, and that we are the United States of America, and that this is what we're doing to people who live in our country. So much of this, I believe, is fueled perhaps by religious fervor, but that's not what's really, in my opinion, causing these attacks on American soil. I think we need to look at our policies, what we've been doing in the Middle East over the years. I mean, we've been...
So what do you think is fueling the attacks, like San Bernardino?
I think that ISIS uses religion to get people to do things, but I don't think that's what it's really about. I don't think it's about your religion is here and my religion is here. I really think it's about what we've been doing over the years with coups and overthrowing people and oil in the Middle East, and they want the Western world out.
I found it really important this week that you saw Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell come out and denounce the comments that were made by Donald Trump with respect to what he wants to see happen.
He's obviously at war with his own party,
absolutely,
as well as with Muslims.
Well, and I think that's the challenge, is that's how Republicans are being portrayed in this environment, as being the ones who are really very much anti-Muslim. And I think what Donald Trump is doing is feeding into this sort of cultural fears that are going on right now, and he's fueling the fire. His campaign has been about creating these sort of villain characters. He was first on Latinos, anti-Latino, and now he's moved on to anti-Muslim in order to fuel his polling numbers. And I think you're seeing that, but it's not representative of the rest of the Republican Party.
Interestingly, Trump's business interests may be beginning to be hurt. Qatar, they took down his
clothing line.
Yeah, and they're taking down the signs, and maybe that'll get to him because nothing else has.
I want to ask you too about the reaction to Islamic women in America. Obviously, are more for the haters out there. Yeah. You're more obvious than Islamic men. So,
absolutely,
how have you been thinking about that?
I mean, we're more visible, and Muslim women aren't different. Generally, women are seen as soft targets when communities are targeted. So, we are more visible. It is frightening, but I think also what the realization is, it's no longer about Trump. When I am getting yelled at, which I am, when I'm being shoved on the sidewalk, which I am here in Washington, D.C., it's very hard for me to say this is an isolated incident of Trump and rhetoric, because people are picking up the message and they're taking action, and a lot of it is violent action against our community.
Do you ever think about taking off the headscarf?
My family have actually sent me many messages begging me, and if I really thought that I was in danger for my life, I probably would. It's allowed under Islam for protection to take it off. But at the same time, I think that it's worth fighting for, because it really is a symbol of freedom of religion right now. It's not just about Islam. It's a real challenge. I'm really proud of American values. I mean, we have a lot of our history that we have to make amends for, but I really believe in the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, stuff that we talk about, and I think it's worth standing up and fighting for, which is what wearing the scarf now means to me in addition to my religious duty.
And I think it's important to note, too, that ISIS wants this to turn into an Armageddon. This is to fulfill the prophecy of the Christians and the Muslims going to war and the end of the earth.
Absolutely.
But what about the fact that Trump is getting so much support from, let's face it, the voters, the primary voters, who in both parties are the most extreme. But the fact that he is getting this support, what does it say about what's going on with immigration in America? To me, it says there are people, obviously some of them are racists. I don't know what percentage. But what about people who feel that the government, both sides, parties, are not having or letting the public have an open debate about immigration?
Well, if this isn't an open debate about immigration, you'll never have one. I mean, in fact, the parties are divided on it. Democrats tending to speak up to say, you ought to let the Syrian refugees in. They're very small in number. The only ones that get in are women and children for the most part. What are we afraid of? And then we say the big lie. We say, we've always loved immigrants. It's important to see this in context. We have always hated immigrants. That is to say, when the Irish and the Italians and the Poles came, there were terrible bigotry, quite comparable to the bigotry against blacks. After they assimilated into the larger, mostly white population, look at the Congress today. Every other name is an Irish name. So it does happen over time, but in the beginning, it's very hard. The difference with the Muslims is that other immigrants, with very few exceptions, have not been associated with violence. That's not why they hated the Irish and the Italians and the Poles. It's
just stereotyping.
That's right, or the Jews, straight out stereotyping. This is related, frankly, to the Iraq War. After the Iraq War, we are reaping the terrible storm.
Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter, @BonnieUrbay or @ToTheContrary. From terrorism to the end of mommy wars.
Who should be the stay-at-home parent? According to new research, it doesn't matter to most Americans. The once traditional family with mother as caregiver and father as breadwinner is now an ancient paradigm. Research by 2 University of Pennsylvania professors found 92% of Americans support working mothers, and 77% say it's okay for the dads to stay home. It's a major shift from a 2007 Pew study that found 40% of people surveyed thought it was bad for society when mothers worked. Only 20% thought it was beneficial. But perceptions have changed. The expectation that fathers must be the provider have diminished, with 70% of mothers and 93% of fathers working. Family income, not gender, has become the most important factor when deciding which parent stays home with the kids.
So Jennifer, to me, this is a sea change. And it's actually a sea change that I thought was going to happen in my boomer generation, but has waited until your millennial generation to take place. Good news as far as you're concerned?
I think it's fantastic news, and I think you're seeing that the conversation has shifted from not just being men versus women, mothers versus fathers, but really allowing fathers and earning potential for families to change the dynamic about how mothers are perceived and how families are growing and evolving in this country.
Well, it's good news for feminism and equal opportunity. It's bad news for the American economy, because the practical underpinning of this is that the American family cannot keep even if without 2 people working. The people who are not even are the people who only have 1 person working, and that's usually single mothers. This has been 40 years of no growth in income except for women going into the workforce. So Americans are accepting it because they know which side their bread is buttered on.
But I mean, it didn't used to be a choice. I mean, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, the mother was always expected to stay home, and the father was expected to go out and earn a living. And in this environment, I've seen studies that have come out over the years where there's a pretty large chunk of working women who earn more than their spouses or partners are earning, and so they are working outside the home, and that's growing. So
I think that the choice, the fact that it's a choice, is absolutely something that we should celebrate and is very important, especially that it's a normalized choice. It no longer holds judgment. But the fact of the matter is that it often does create still additional burdens for women, the triple, the quadruple burden, because no matter what happens when they enter the workforce, their other responsibilities often aren't stopped or shared, which if men are staying at home, that is a positive sign that at least some of the responsibility is being shared. But we always have to be careful of the triple burden. We talk a lot about this in developing countries, that offering them income but not taking away other responsibilities really just it means more work for women.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's what I was going to say, because we've talked on this show too about how women still do most of the houseworks. Women still do most of the child care. Women still go to the schools and the PTAs, and they do more of that than the men do. So it is cause for celebration, but it also means women are still doing more.
But if we look below the figures, this is not all about it's some for you and some for me. The greater majority of these are working class men, cannot find employment.
Well, that was true. That was true in the Great Recession, which most people feel is still around to some extent anyway. But male employment is coming back now. The construction is going back up.
It's coming back, but you still have men on disability. You have men who are middle-aged, who'll never get back into the workforce. You have a whole set of working class men whose fathers would have been working now and they cannot.
What I would love to see is what Norway and Sweden has done, which is actually capture women's contribution to the informal economy by driving, by staying home, and put a number to it so we can actually see what women's contribution to the economy is, including all of the informal sector, because that still is one of our strongest contributions that directly feeds into economic growth.
What would you think that government should pay women for the work they do?
It's not considered pay, it's more utility, but it does have economic benefit. And again, we often forget that. We just think women staying at home or women who are doing both jobs and are feeding into their own household, but the reality is they're feeding into the economy at large.
I wonder if this is part of younger people. We did a story a few months ago that younger people don't think there are two genders anymore. They see 6, 8 genders. And I wonder if so the point is gender stereotypes are dying, and is manifesting itself in more women being able to go out and work, and men being able to stay home and be the nurturer if that's what their personality is.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that men like having the choice. Many men do, anyway, and many men aren't threatened by that. And it is this new generation, and they don't see a problem with LGBT issues. They don't see a problem with women working and men staying home. I mean, it is very much, pushing through those old stereotypes.
And so we're seeing, major changes in the societal definition of gender, and this is part of it. Now, question I have for you, federally subsidized daycare. If men are going to do half the child care, and again, it's 2.2 million men as of this study. It's not, 40 million like it should be. But if men are going to provide part of the child care and pitch in equally, does that do away with the need for federally subsidized daycare?
I don't think that it does. I think one of the things that's interesting about the numbers that are out there around stay-at-home dads have doubled in the past 10 years. And that is
since 89.
Correct. And that is because of policy changes, because of things like California, where you've instituted paid leave programs, where you're seeing an increase in the number of dads taking paternity leave. And
Mark Zuckerberg.
Right. You're seeing that with someone like Mark Zuckerberg. But you're also, again, that's the opportunity is there now more so than it ever has been for dads to stay at home, but also for dads to sort of see policies that are impacting them in a favorable way and allowing mothers to go back into the workplace and advance in terms of their income potential, as well as in terms of their ability to downstream impact their families.
And your thoughts on...
Well, when men began to see that staying at home may hurt them professionally, then you're going to have perhaps more voices for the kind of child care that we have all over the world except in the United States.
Very good point. We were going to bring you at this point the Jane Goodall piece, but we will be airing it next week because of breaking news. A survey by the RAND Corporation shows elite servicemen see allowing women to serve in Navy, SEAL, Army, Delta, or other commando units could hurt their effectiveness and lower the standards, and it may drive men away from the dangerous posts. An overwhelming majority of those who agreed to respond to the RAND survey said they believe women don't have the physical strength or mental toughness to do the grueling jobs. Some 85% of the respondents said they oppose opening the special operations jobs to women, and 70% oppose having women in their individual units. More than 80% said women aren't strong enough and can't handle the demands of the job. 64% said they aren't mentally tough enough. This is shocking to me. And we should add, by the way, that this was a survey that sent out to, I think, about 15,000 elite servicemen. Yeah. And the answers came back laced with profanity and extremely angry. I'm feeling really sorry for the first women Navy SEALs. I mean, what an environment to go into.
And it made me think of what happened, Bonnie, back in the 70s when they allowed the women to go into the Naval Academy and in West Point. Full disclosure, I was an Army ROTC for 2 years in college, and my father went to West Point, and I heard these types of arguments all the time. Women couldn't go to the Ranger schools. They wouldn't even give them a chance. But now look what we have. We have women completing Ranger School, one of the toughest courses there is in the Army. So this is just old stuff to me, and I was kind of hemming like that in disgust because it's just old stuff. And what's startling to me is it's younger white males saying this. And I'm like, who's been raising these boys?
Well, but also what it takes to get, a lot of people who, I know in the Army, this was true about 10 years ago, only 70% of men pass the physical test to get into the Army. Imagine what percentage don't make it into Navy SEALs or the Marines or the elite units. Are you surprised by the reaction?
I suppose I'm by the profanity, by the strength of the reaction. If it would make them feel any better, hey, look, I couldn't make it. Even when I was younger, I couldn't make it, and guess what? Most women can't. But most women haven't felt the need to try.
But I'm not sure that 50% of men who apply to get into those units make it. I bet it's less.
When you said elite units, those are the words for it. That's why I thought they were above this. And I must say, one of the reasons I'm so disappointed is that men were, when gays were welcomed into the armed services, there tended to be more and more men saying that's the way it should be. And so I fooled myself into thinking, hey, this generation is really, hip. They're understanding that everybody is equal. But the venom, these are highly educated men, these are elite men in every sense of the word. Does that indicate that men below them? I hope that's not the case.
And it comes a week after Defense Secretary Carter said we're opening all frontline jobs to women.
Maybe because of that.
The very top of the Pentagon gets it, but these guys who are only slightly lower doesn't.
I mean, I can't think of any profession that didn't face this at one point or time. And, I think about people who were the first people to go to the law school or medical school that were women, and I've heard the horror stories there. And I don't think progress is ever linear. We go forward and we go backward, and this is a sign that in this area we've gone backward. I do hope, learning from the other experiences of women, that there is a lot of support from organizations and communities for those first bunch of women who attempt to go in. I think thinking of the support is important.
I just want to say something really quick to your point, the vitriol. I was shocked by that. We're not mentally strong enough. And the other one was, what are our wives going to think? They may think I'm having an affair. They might get jealous. I mean, this just reminds me of we can't let women go to college.
Exactly. It's the same type of
We're fighting against the biggest boys club in the world, and this is hundreds and hundreds of years of culture here in terms of being ingrained in the military, and I tend to agree with Eleanor with respect to the dynamics that are going on in terms of how the military is responding with these decisions, whether that be with the Marine Corps making changes to physical fitness requirements to make parity between men and women. For years it's been one or the other, but not both. And then also seeing the changes here. We're responding to an environment with the Army Rangers now becoming women, joining the Army Ranger program. I think talking to people in the military, I think this is very much not indicative of the entire military on the whole, but it is very unfortunate to hear these comments, and I think we're definitely a long way away from being in a place where I would feel safe about knowing my daughter was going to become a Navy SEAL and what she would have to experience.
Well, and in the training for the Army Rangers, there was one corporal or something who part of the training is they have to carry 216 pounds, I think it was, in their backpack for so many miles. And he got tired, and a woman who was in the training picked it up and took it for him. So do you think, as these guys see those kinds of things happening with the few, let's remember, the few, the proud, I mean, really the very few number of women who will be able to pass these physical tests, do you think that they'll change their minds?
I would hope so, and I think the interesting part is that you have folks like Congresswoman Martha McSally, who was the first female fighter pilot. She's flying in the air in a jet, but it's not the same as seeing women in combat on the front lines, and I think that's something that can be very hard for our culture to stomach if we get to a place where we're actually seeing women on the front lines of the battlefield.
Very quickly.
Top down. In the military, people in short order do comply.
All right. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.